we're not totally corrupted. We're doing things because we enjoy it. We have passion. I feel like a lot of journalists nowadays, once they reach a certain point, they're told by their higher ups, like, look, you can't ask these questions. You have to be very supportive. You have to be in line. We're kids. We're rebellious. We're doing what we enjoy. We're not being paid for these things. And I think that's why it's kids who are asking these questions. And on that same point, it's like, well, she's not expecting kids to ask these questions because, again, a lot of these elite people, they come to these elite schools knowing that these kids are going to ask very easy questions. And, it's a way for them to come here. They get paid, I'm assuming, a lot of money. And then they can post on Twitter, hey, we went to this event and we're really smart.
Join the best in the movement. It's Conservative Conversations with ISI, educating for liberty since 1953.
Welcome back. You're listening to Conservative Conversations with Johnny and Marlo.
Today, Daniel Schmidt, senior editor at the Chicago Thinker, a Collegiate Network supported newspaper at the University of Chicago, is discussing with us double standards toward disinformation. You may have seen Daniel in a video that went viral recently, receiving somewhere up towards 2.6 million views, showing him questioning Anne Applebaum about the Hunter Biden laptop scandal. And you may have also seen him on Fox discussing the topic. So we're excited to have Daniel on today to talk about this confrontation itself, disinformation, and the work the Chicago Thinker is doing on campus to expose truths that the media and campus administrations seem to be uncomfortable with. So thanks for joining us, Daniel.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Before we get started with our interview, I'd like to thank you all for listening to Conservative Conversations. This podcast is a production of the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. Our mission at ISI is to educate for liberty. If you'd like to help us in pursuing that mission, please rate and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts to help us reach more listeners like yourself. I would also like to make a plug for our second inaugural homecoming weekend, which is for ISI alumni, faculty, supporters, and students on May 13th through 14th, featuring Victor Davis Hanson, Ross Douthat, Patrick Deneen, and many others. You're welcome to register at our website, where we're also offering a discounted rate for ISI students and alumni under the age of 30. So, Daniel, can you start off by telling us a little bit about the exchange you had with Anne Applebaum at the event you attended called The Disinformation and Erosion of Democracy?
Sure. So just to preface everything, I'm a freshman at the University of Chicago, and I write for a publication called the Chicago Thinker. It's the conservative publication here at the University of Chicago. We've been doing it for a little over a year, so pretty new publication. But yeah, so there was this conference at our school called Disinformation and the Erosion of Democracy. And we noticed that there were a whole litany of left-wing people going to speak here, like President Obama, CNN's Brian Stelter, and The Atlantic's Anne Applebaum. And we figured, this would be a great chance to actually ask some tough questions, because we think usually at these events, it's a great opportunity, but the students don't usually ask critical questions. They ask very easygoing questions, very softball questions, and we find that to be a total waste of opportunity. So we managed to get media passes to this event, and we came in hoping to ask some critical questions. It came to Anne Applebaum. That was the first day. That was one of the first panels. And, throughout her speech, she was talking about how important it is to combat disinformation, how the media is sort of this gatekeeping institution, and how they care so much about facts and preserving the truth. And so I figured, okay, well, I think the story that was arguably the subject of the most disinformation was the Hunter Biden laptop story. This was a story that we were told was Russian disinfo. It was fake. Voters shouldn't know about it. And then lo and behold, just a few weeks ago, the New York Times came out and said, actually, the story is real. And so I was looking into Anne Applebaum, and I noticed a few months ago she was saying, or actually a year ago, she was saying voters shouldn't know about this story. It's irrelevant. And unless you exist out of the Fox News ecosystem, you're not talking about it. So I figured, okay, here's someone who claims to be an objective journalist who really cares about the truth. Let me ask her about this, and let me ask her if she thinks the way the media treated the story was inappropriate. So I managed, luckily enough, to be able to ask a question. And I just simply asked her, do you think the way the media treated the Hunter Biden laptop story, do you think it was inappropriate? And do you think the media should act differently in the future? In return, she told me she thinks the story is irrelevant and she doesn't care. That was literally her answer. All the listeners can hear the clip at Thinker Chicago on Twitter. And of course, her answer, because just how ridiculous, how arrogant, how stupefying it was. It went viral. It garnered over 2.6 million views. And funnily enough, at the very end of this whole exchange, she actually blocked us on Twitter. Thinker Chicago has been blocked by Anne Applebaum for merely asking her a question. So that's basically the synopsis of all this thing. Yeah, it's crazy. It's been a crazy couple of weeks because of the attention we've gotten, but yeah, it just shows one question from a college kid can, I guess, throw off one of our most esteemed journalists.
Why do you think it took a student? Like, why do you think it took a student to ask someone with that high of a profile this question? It's especially in the conservative atmosphere. And, I follow Twitter news very frequently, and a lot of the people I follow are obviously conservative commentators. So this story has not left salience. Like, it's still, people are still kind of, horrified that this story was essentially buried and it was also suppressed. So did it seem like your peers and the panelists were actually interested in discussing disinformation? And were you surprised by Applebaum's response when you stood up and asked her about that story? Because it seemed like she was not expecting to even, approach the subject of Hunter Biden's laptop, although it's, like I said, been a pretty newsworthy subject.
Yeah, and I mean, on that point, when I just went up and asked the question, when I named Hunter Biden, I could tell around me people were like, "Uh-oh, he said the name." It felt like what I was asking was super, off topic, taboo. It's like I said a bunch of cuss words almost. The students around me were giving me a lot of nasty looks. And if you watch the clip at the very end of her answering it, David Axelrod, who was also there, the moderator, a huge Obama advisor, he was like, "Okay, that's enough of that. We're going to end the conference." So it seemed really weird. It seemed like I asked something that wasn't allowed. But on your question as to why, kids are asking these questions, I think it's because, we're not totally corrupt yet. We're doing things because we enjoy it. We have passion. I feel like a lot of journalists nowadays, once they reach a certain point, they're told by their higher ups, like, look, you can't ask these questions. You have to be very supportive. You have to be in line. We're kids. We're rebellious. We're doing what we enjoy. We're not being paid for these things. And I think that's why it's kids who are asking these questions. And on that same point, it's like, well, she's not expecting kids to ask these questions because, again, a lot of these elite people, they come to these elite schools knowing that these kids are going to ask very easy questions. And, it's a way for them to come here. They get paid, I'm assuming, a lot of money. And then they can post on Twitter, "Hey, we went to this event and we're really smart." So, yeah, I think she really wasn't expecting it. And, my peers and I, we joke, we're like, we don't even know if they're going to have this event next year because we totally humiliated them. My peers, one of my friends asked a question to Brian Stelter. That went viral. Another one asked a question to Amy Klobuchar. That also went viral. So we asked, we went 3 for 3. And we seriously wonder if our school is going to not do this event next year because of just how bad they looked from a bunch of kids who are doing this just for fun, really.
It's really just unbelievable that you have, 19, 20, 21-year-olds. And here they bring out sort of the A-team of kind of elite media, veteran journalists and commentators, and just one after another, you're stumping them. So I love it. Good work. It's hilarious. It would be hilarious if it wasn't so disheartening that these are like the gatekeepers of information. What is, like, generally speaking, like, what's the climate on Chicago's campus? Is it living up to the famous Chicago principles, free expression and inquiry that everyone thinks about when they hear the name Chicago? What's been your experience?
Right. Well, of course, I mean, it's a very left-leaning school. I mean, we're definitely in the minority, but I will say with this whole COVID thing, how just crazy it's gotten. We've noticed we've actually gotten a lot more people on our side because we're the only ones willing to speak up. We went viral a few months ago for criticizing the booster shot mandate, and that went pretty well. A lot of people were saying, thank you guys for speaking up. I will say I still think University of Chicago is a lot better than its peer schools. I hear a lot at like Yale, for example, a few weeks ago at Yale Law School, they were shouting down speakers. I don't know if that would happen in a school like this. It could happen. I don't know. But I feel like the students here are more open-minded, are more willing to listen to the other side. But of course, we're still in the minority. I hear a lot of people telling me, we're closeted conservatives. Thank you for doing it, but we don't think we could ever speak up. And that does dishearten me. I wish everyone had the confidence and the security to speak up their minds. But we're trying to change that. That's really the Chicago Thinkers' goal, is to make it more comfortable to speak up and to create an ecosystem in which these views can come out without being threatened, without silence, without censorship.
Would you say that you mentioned, your peers may be receptive to those principles and certainly may want to foster an environment where their other peers, especially at a prestigious school, would respect those principles that serve as a model for quite a lot of other universities, especially Foundation for Individual Rights of Education kind of uses the Chicago principles as kind of the model for universities. But would you say that is the same attitude for campus administrators, faculty, professors, et cetera? Do you think that they want to foster that same sense of free inquiry, dialogue, ideas, and of course what goes from that is free journalism?
Yeah, well, funnily enough, I actually was fired from the main student newspaper here, the Chicago Maroon. I was fired because I challenged a left wing columnist to a debate on mask mandates, and they claimed I was harassing her. So on that point, I don't think they're upholding it, which is ridiculous, which is why I'm happy to say I write for the conservative publication here because we actually care about dialogue and debate. But I mean, I've had great professors who have totally supported me, but I've heard, there are terrible professors here who are totally anti-conservative ideas and they're open about it. I think that's the consequence of academic freedom. You're going to give these professors a lot of freedom, and some of them are going to use it for good purposes, others not so much. But again, I do, one of the reasons why I came to the school was because of the Chicago principles. And, our goal is to preserve it. I mean, we at the Chicago Thinker, we say this might come off as too arrogant, but we really feel like we're preserving the brand. We're showing people that at the University of Chicago, we can still have these tough conversations. We can still, ask these elite leaders tough questions. We're not totally, ignorant. We're not totally just, asking silly questions. We really care about the school. We really love what the school stands for. And we give the school a lot of slack, but at the end of the day, we really do love the school and we're just trying to preserve what the school stands for.
And I'm sure that, many of the alumni who are not there right now, but are looking back at Chicago with fondness for what it stood for and what it hopefully still stands for today are really applauding and encouraging the courageous work that you're doing. I am curious on, from your perspective, you go to an elite school, it's a top school, you're a journalist there, you see, people like Anne Applebaum come in. And I think, a lot of, I think the way that your question was received, not only was it a sort of a challenge to kind of their liberal orthodoxy, it was sort of met with kind of laughter or scorn, sort of dismissed as like, this isn't a serious person, this isn't a serious question. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about kind of this gap between kind of the concerns of liberal elites or in these echo chambers and actual voters, actual Americans. Why do you think there's so much condescension and laughter when you bring up something like Hunter Biden? Where, what's going on there with this disconnect? And is there anything we can do to close the gap in the rest of our country?
No, it's huge. It certainly is huge. I mean, I come from a very middle class family from rural Tennessee. So believe me, I know what like average Americans care about, and it's not what a lot of people talk about here. Here you hear a lot of talk about pronouns and gender theory and critical race theory, ideas that if you went to like middle Tennessee, no one would know what that is because they do not care because they have much more pressing concerns. And regarding Hunter Biden's laptop story, this is an important story because polls came out finding that I think 1 in 6 Biden voters would have voted differently had they known the content. That could have switched the election results. So this is not just some minuscule topics. This could have literally changed who's president right now. And so for Anne Applebaum to just dismiss it is so ridiculous and so arrogant and so inexcusable. But yeah, I mean, I think, it's an interesting topic about how at these elite schools, there's such a disconnect between what they talk about and what average Americans talk about. And I think the key to really fixing that is we need more middle class people at schools like this. A lot of kids at these schools come from boarding schools, come from very elite private schools. And at these schools, I'm hearing in 10th grade, they're taking critical race theory classes. And in 11th grade, they're already, learning about transgenderism in a full, cohesive manner. And it's like they come here and then they spread these ideas. And, I'm an outsider. I come from middle America. I think these schools, if they really care about diversity, they should also care about diversity geographically. We should be seeing more middle-class people at these schools, but we can't because the tuition screws, it messes them up. Middle-class people are screwed the most when it comes to applying to schools because the financial aid is often terrible. And so I would encourage, I hear sometimes I hear from conservatives telling middle-class people don't go to Ivy League schools because it's going to corrupt them. I would say the inverse. I would say we need more middle-class, sort of real people at these schools. We have too many sort of legacy people who are just way up in the economic strata. And I think that contributes really to this disconnect. But yeah, of course, huge disconnect. And that's really what I'm interested in, because again, I talk to normal people and they have no idea what critical race theory is or what gender pronouns are. But here it's like accepted orthodoxy, and it's bizarre. It really is.
Obviously, you're a free thinker, an independent-minded thinker. And so there are certainly, a lot of students like you, and Collegiate Network is especially invested in finding them. And I certainly agree with your point that, these schools usually don't have the best interests or are representing those interests of Americans from all of the class strata, not just the upper level elite in their coursework, because the coursework does often reflect these kind of boutique interests of that upper crust that are interested in, the gender identity, critical race theory type discourse. So I'm curious kind of like about, you said, that the universities usually will, or the attitude is they might corrupt students who do come from these backgrounds and so that diversity of economic background. But do you see that, if you aren't the type that is, very, very adamant about, being independent minded, maybe you're a conservative student that will go against the grain when you're in college. But do you see a lot of your peers who do come from those backgrounds often adapting to their environments because out of peer pressure, out of fear of being looked at as backwards or heterodox or being unpersoned even for not sharing the views that not only perhaps other students who are more outspoken and radical are proliferating, but also campus administrations and faculty are often reinforcing those same, the teachings of, we'll just call it critical race theory because that's kind of the buzzword that encompasses what everyone knows I'm talking about right now.
Yeah, no, good question. And I'm sure it's real. I'm sure kids are conforming, kids are obeying by, what the system demands of them. And it's saddening to hear because I think that like corrupts their soul. I think deep down they know it's not right, but, maybe they're worried they're going to get a bad grade, or maybe they're worried, they're going to lose a friend, or a romantic interest might not be into them. That's actually a friend of mine told me, this girl is liberal and I'm worried she's not going to like me because I'm conservative. And it's like, you have to stay true to what you believe in, but it's so easy to succumb. And again, I think that's why it's so important we have things like the Chicago Thinker or other conservative publications. Like our very presence, I feel like, adds something to show that there are smart conservative people. I think the impression in academia is the only smart people are left-leaning people. They mention how most PhD people are left-leaning, and therefore, if you're smart, you have to be left-leaning. Come on, there's so many conservative intellectuals. They're just not talked about as much, or they're being censored or silenced. And so I think we're just trying to create the idea that there can be sophisticated, smart, conservative people. We're not all from the South. We're not all, rednecks, as that sort of the stereotype is. We truly care about the exchange of ideas. We love books. We love learning. We're not all just dumb internet people, whatever. And I think just having that image in and of itself adds so much to the equation, because then people, are able to see a representation. I mean, a lot of these kids, again, who go to boarding schools or go to schools in California, they legitimately never see conservatives in their life. The only conservatives they see are on TV or on social media. And of course, that's going to be a caricature. That's going to be a bad representation. And so, I've had this countless times when I talk to a person and they're like, you're very well spoken, you're smart. I tell them, yeah, I like Trump too. They're like, wait, what? I mean, they're totally surprised. I think if we just, at these top schools, the more conservative representation we can get, the more we can sort of break this pressure to succumb. And I think we're working on that. It's not going to be super, super easy, but I think we are getting there, and that's really meaningful. And that's our goal.
I'm curious about like the experience in the classroom as a freshman at Chicago. We did a campus event at Yale earlier this week, and I was up there talking to some of the students, and one of our former honors students had told me, he's in a relatively kind of prestigious program there, and it pained him because all the readings for the class are really solid. Everyone reads whatever, all of Thucydides, Peloponnesian War, but typically what happens is like they'll also assign a couple Atlantic pieces alongside Thucydides. And then basically he said every class kind of unfolds the same way. At the beginning of the semester, there's like 4 or 5 like really progressive kids who have their one identity issue. And every class, they basically take every point and just like, rip the steering wheel and take it back to their niche identity thing. And then, so they're very vocal. And then there's like 20 kids who are just kind of careerists, like they want to go work for McKinsey. And they basically just, when they graduate, they basically just like read the room for the first like 3 or 4 weeks and kind of see where the tone is. And then just kind of mimic and parrot the like 5 more social justice oriented students just to get by. And then maybe there's your outlier conservative who stands up. I'm curious, like these elite schools, so hard to get into. Like, do you actually feel like, is that what it's like at Chicago? And do you feel like the real intellectual life of the students in classroom discussions, like how high of quality or caliber is it compared to you and your editors at the Thinker, talking in your newsroom or whatever?
Yeah, I laugh at that because that's like the most spot on thing I've heard. I mean, it's so true. These progressive students, I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming they're a majority, but they're definitely the loudest ones. And so whenever, yeah, like you said, when we're in a classroom situation, they're going to be sort of dominating the conversation. And then, as you said, most kids are, a good number of kids at the school are apolitical. And so at the end of the day, like you said, they want to get that McKinsey job. They want to get that Goldman Sachs job. And if that means, shutting up and just agreeing with the loud mob, they'll do that. It's unfortunate, but you see a lot of people like that. That's why they come to these elite schools. They don't really come here for the intellectual stuff. They come here just for the diploma so they can make big money. That's spot on. All first years here have to take, or freshmen have to take a humanities class where we read, philosophers, John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, that sort of thing. And those conversations almost always go to the far left. There are many communists at the school, like openly proud communists. And when we read like Karl Marx, for example, it's pretty much accepted that you have to agree with everything Karl Marx says, and if you don't, you're dumb. I mean, that's the accepted wisdom nowadays. And so, yeah, very few people are willing to speak up, and most people just sort of silently agree with it. They want to get the good grade, they want to please the professor, and then they can get out of it. But I worry about that because that, I think, does something to the mind when you like sort of just go along with it constantly. Eventually, you're going to believe in it. You're going to think what you're agreeing with is true, and you're going to take that to the workforce. And then when you raise kids, you're going to tell them those values, and the system is going to constantly just reproduce itself. And unless people are willing to provide opposition, this is going to keep continuing. I think it's all about just, having a public and vocal opposition, which we're all trying to do. That's key. And as you mentioned, in most elite schools, you don't even see this opposition. And so people just assume the left is right on everything because they're the loudest and they're the most authoritative voices.
Could you tell us a little bit? So this was actually before the most recent Chicago Thinker story, the one that went viral, I think it was like last week or something. I was, the first time I kind of encountered one of your viral stories was the one on boosters, which you previously mentioned. Could you tell us, I know that was earlier this year, could you tell us a little bit about that story and what impact did it have on your campus? Because I saw that was trending on social media as well.
Yeah, of course. So this was when Omicron was going around in December. The University of Chicago announced they would be mandating a booster shot. And all of us at the Thinker, we said, this is ridiculous for several reasons. We feel like these boosters, there's not enough about them. We don't know for sure if they're safe or if they're efficacious. We feel like young people should have a choice. It should not be forced upon us. And we think, thirdly, like young people don't even really need them. We feel like if we get COVID, it'll be okay. And to sort of force us to get these things, when, again, we don't know what might happen, we found that all to be egregious and outrageous. And then the most outrageous thing of all, which we noticed after doing some snooping, after doing some journalism, we noticed students here have to get it, but hospital employees and scientists do not have to get it. For whatever reason, they're exempt from the requirement. And we did some snooping and we found out basically the university was worried that if the scientists and hospital employees refused to get it, they would quit. Then the hospitals would lose money because they would have less patients to treat. And they were worried about losing money. So it ultimately came to profits. Of course, the school knows students are never going to quit because they're paying so much money and they want the coveted diploma. So the school has so much leverage over us. So they're going to force us. So we found this huge hypocrisy and we said, this is ridiculous. So the editors at the Chicago Thinker, we wrote a massive editorial just going over our basic concerns, linking to a lot of scientific literature, saying we're willing to debate anyone on this topic. No one really debated us. I mean, they were kind of used to that by now. But yeah, I mean, and then after that, the piece blew up. I think it has now over 100,000 views on our website. And I think it blew up because we're, to our knowledge, the only vocal elite conservative group at a college campus speaking up about it. We don't really see our peers speaking up about it, to our knowledge. And we find that to be, kind of unacceptable. We find this to be a very important issue. And the school gets away with it, and we find that to be very important. And so that was our kind of first big break. And in terms of impact, I mean, we did notice a lot of students were coming up to us saying look, again, quietly coming up to us saying, I agree with you guys. I did a religious exemption or I did a medical exemption. And, we hope, the restrictions are going to be lifted now, but, any sort of pressure we can put on the school, we feel like is good because people need to know about what's going on in these schools. Unless you're a student or a parent, you don't really know. And there's a lot of important stuff that people need to know, I think.
Daniel, I'm curious, we hear, thanks to a lot of your good reporting, all of the outrageous things happening at University of Chicago. But, you started this paper not only to kind of expose what the left was doing, but hopefully to, actually begin to embolden other students to speak out, to bring about some change on campus. So I'm wondering if, you'd mentioned that some students have come up to you and said, hey, I'm, a closet conservative, appreciate what you're doing. Don't feel like I can really speak out right now. But I'm wondering if there are any other positive stories about the impact that your paper is having that might give some encouragement to some of your alumni who I know are very disheartened right now.
Sure. So one story I did, which I'm proud of, there was this policy at the school that banned unvaccinated students from the dining hall. I mean, they could not go in the dining hall to eat. And this was a very under the radar policy. The school quietly announced it. And so I inquired on this because I said, this does not align with the Chicago ordinance. The Chicago ordinance says if you get an approved exemption, you're allowed to go wherever you want. And every student at this school, if they're not vaccinated, they have an exemption. So this policy seemed clearly out of, this was not like a legal policy. And so I sent a bunch of emails to a bunch of people in the university's administration, probably like 30 to 40 emails. Half of them went unanswered. A few of them got very, very lazy, not legitimate answers. But then we noticed quietly the day afterward, or a few days after we shed a light on all of this, the school quietly revoked the policy. And I don't want to take full credit for that, but I feel like if we did not investigate this policy might still very well exist, and it would be a clearly unethical and maybe even illegal policy. Meaning, kids who did not want to be vaccinated could not go in dining halls to eat. That's a very integral part of the college experience. And so, I feel like college administrators are so used to just getting away with things. Students rarely ever snoop into it, which is interesting because you would find, at like these mainstream newspapers, these kids would be doing, hardcore journalism. We don't see that often. Ironically, the only people to our knowledge who are asking the tough questions are these conservative libertarian students. And so, we did this and the policy was revoked, and we thought that was like a huge win. And so, yeah, to any young people listening to this or to the alumni, just know that like administrators think they can get away with stuff. But if you just do a little bit of prying, a little bit of pressure, they'll fold often because they know what they're doing is wrong. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're really trying to do some great investigative journalism that only we can do because we're students. A lot of outsiders couldn't be doing this stuff because they don't know what's going on. So that was a win a few weeks ago. That was very great. But yeah, we're just trying to do more and more of that. That's really what we're about.
So, Daniel, I know you're a freshman, so you have time to kind of discern what your vocation is, so to speak, or, what career route you'll take. But obviously, you seem very invested and interested in journalism. You're doing a great job at the Chicago Thinker, already doing this like pretty good reporting and exposing things that, have dust on them. So I'm curious, do you plan on, continuing your journalism career through college and into the future, or kind of how do you see yourself proceeding with, some of the skills that you're developing through the Chicago Thinker? And do you have kind of ambitions to continue with journalism?
Yeah, as of now, I think I want to be a journalist. It's something I just enjoy. I've always been a curious person. I think that's maybe the way I am, is because I've always been unhappy with like a very basic response. I've always wanted to know like why something is the case, and who can I talk to verify that. So yeah, as of now, journalism is what I'm most interested in. I think more young conservatives should enter journalism. I feel like the journalism field nowadays for young people is so far left. I mean, I don't know. A lot of these journalists I hear nowadays are just doing terrible, terrible stuff, doxing people, doing just terribly unethical practices. And I think, the time for like legitimately fair and true journalism is needed now more than ever. And so I'm not going to say I'm going to fix that, but if I can just somewhat add to that, I'll be very happy. But, I genuinely love what I do. And I can just say for the people of the Chicago Thinker, I mean, I've never met a more brilliant and motivated group of kids. I mean, these people are not, we're not being paid. We don't have any special donors going in and telling us what to do. We do this truly out of our own hearts. I mean, we're skipping class. Our grades are slipping because of all this stuff, frankly, but we're doing this because we love it, because we really think it's important. And we were noticing it, things are slowly changing, and that is the most meaningful part of it all. So.
Daniel, a question for you about, ISI and the Collegiate Network, and the Chicago Thinker is part of ISI's Collegiate Network of student journalism papers around the country. We've actually got Avita Duffy is going to be speaking at our homecoming event here in a few weeks at ISI. So could you maybe speak a little bit to how the Collegiate Network has played a role in helping make some of your work at the Thinker possible in ways that which ISI supports you?
Of course. Well, I mean, I don't even think our paper could be started without the Collegiate Network. I mean, it's very difficult to start a paper, to start a website from scratch. There are so many just intricacies you don't really realize when you start a website or when you start a paper, infrastructure, funding, networking, that sort of thing. And so it's very important that we have organizations like the Collegiate Network to support young conservatives. I mean, I feel like the left has so much on their side, social media, all the major universities, all the major companies are supporting them. Conservatives need this alternative infrastructure going forward to win. And so, yes, the Collegiate Network, sponsoring publications all over the country, that's so important. And again, if you're a young person listening to this and you want to start a paper, definitely get in touch with them because they will help you out. Because we need papers like the Chicago Thinker everywhere at every single university. Because big stuff are happening at universities, and this is like really we are the future generation, and so we need to start exposing these people and talking about what's going on here. It's very important. But yes, huge support. Don't think it can be done without the Collegiate Network.
Great. Thanks, Daniel. Appreciate that answer. And ISI is happy to help, what you're doing in any way we can, especially with, training for journalists, reporting courses, our National Editors Conference. We want to be a resource to you. And also, I think what you're doing is really an inspiration for other college students at different campuses. So the importance of some of these national conferences is getting you in the same room as students at other schools and kind of inspiring them to follow in your footsteps. I want to wrap up with one question that we ask all of our guests on Conservative Conversations, which is, what is conservatism, or what does conservatism mean to you personally?
Interesting question. I think conservatism for me is the preservation of liberty. It's the preservation of order. It's the preservation of moral truths that we deem to be true since the history of this country that we now seem to have forgotten about. It's the encouragement of actual conversation and civility, not just totally intolerance and chaos. It's the idea that, we are in this nation for a grander purpose. And so to forget that purpose, I think, is a huge disgrace. I think now at universities, we're told this country is terrible, this country is racist, it's evil, this country is the greatest place on earth. And so I think we have to recognize that. We have to realize what this country can truly achieve. And I think that is the ideal of conservatism. It's the realization that this country is great the way it was founded, the way it was started. And we don't need to change those foundational ideas. We need to fight for them. We need to embrace them. We need to protect them, and we need to preserve them. I think that is integral to conservatism.
Well, thank you so much again for joining us today, Daniel. If people are interested in seeing more of your work or following you or the Chicago Thinker, where can they find you?
So you can follow me at Real D Schmidt on Twitter. That is Real D and then SCHMIDT. And you can find the Chicago Thinker at thechicagothinker.com.
Thanks so much again for joining us, Daniel.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Conservative Conversations with ISI. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please feel free to head over to isi.org/resources to see all that we offer our members, including the Intercollegiate Review, select modern age articles, ISI books, and of course, this podcast. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to rate and review, and we will see you next time on Conservative Conversations with ISI.